The third source of revenue streams for the district come from these other two primary. They're called pilot or pilot agreements, and that stands for payments in lieu of taxes or district reserves. We'll take these apart and look at both of them, remembering that these take up about 6 to 7% of the total school budget. So pilots are an economic development tool. They vary in the terms of their duration, like how long the pilots are, and they also vary in terms of the agencies that are involved with the pilot agreement, what percentage each of those agencies get. So for example, a pilot agreement in our community might have a portion of the pilot being paid to the county, to the town of Avon, to the village of Avon, and to the school district. How much each of those entities get is something that varies by agreement, and how long the agreement is in place also varies by agreement. These revenues are excluded from what we call the levy from before, and it gets really complicated. So I'm going to do my best to explain a complicated example. So hypothetically, this is a fictional town, and this is a fictional example. Everything in here is grossly exaggerated, simply to try to provide a talking point. So here we have this industry that enters a pilot agreement. So this industry, it's just wanting to get started. So instead of starting the business, having all those startup costs and paying taxes at that point, entities involved agree to a payment in lieu of taxes. They all agree that the business, while it's starting up, will pay $5,000 a year to the various entities, in the school district will get $5,000. Let me clarify that. They pay more than $5,000, but the school district's portion is $5,000. Also in this fictional community, we have these 10 identical homes. Each of these identical homes is assessed at $175,000, and all of these homes in this fictional community pay $5,000 in school tax on their home. So the total property wealth, because this business is outside of the taxable property wealth at this point, is just related to these homes at $1.75 million is the total property wealth, and the total amount collected in taxes is $50,000, with each of the 10 homes paying $5,000. The total revenue that goes to the district as the money is coming in would be $55,000, $5,000 from this agreed upon pilot and $50,000 from these local taxes. This is an example of a business that is on a pilot, how it might work in a really, really simplified version. If we look at when this business comes off of the pilot, so in the year it moves off of the pilot, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. So as it's coming off of the pilot, it receives an assessment of $400,000. So instead of a simple pilot payment agreement, there's actually an assessment of property that must be considered. The total revenue is going to stay at $55,000, but it's going to start getting divided a little bit differently. Again, we have each of these homes assessed at $175,000. So the total property wealth has to be calculated. So the total property wealth is the sum of all of these home values plus the value of this business now that is on the tax levy. So the 175,000 times 10 is 1.75 million, plus the 400,000 gives us a total property value of $2,150,000. Of that total property value, the business is 400,000, so they represent about 18.6% of the total property value, and the homes represent 81.4%. So we go back to this $55,000 total revenue that comes in, and we divide it according to the percentages. So the $55,000 times the 18.6% means that the business now has to pay $10,230 for its tax levy. So of the total 55,000, more than 20% of it, or close to 20% of it, is coming, should be not more than, close to 18.6% to be exact, is coming from the business. The rest of this now, of the 55,000, what remains is $44,770. There's a typo there. It's $44,770. When you divide that evenly amongst the evenly devalued homes, then the total for each of those property owners is $4,478. So when there's not a pilot in place, it's simply the total property value summed up the basic revenue that needs to come from all of those properties, then divided to the proportion of the total value that each property represents. So this is a really simple version. That's it's fictional. Like, so I want to make sure I'm clear about that. It's fictional, but you can see where it gets very complicated with multiple pilots coming into the mix, multiple pilots coming off of the mix. Those pilots being of different durations, those pilots being of different values and percentages. They're going to cause some wrinkles that need to be ironed on a year-to-year basis. Then add in our homes in the community are not perfectly even in terms of assessed value. There could be weather disasters that might affect the property value. There might be home improvements that affect the property value. And then different lands, whether business, agricultural, homes, can be taxed at different rates. And then add in different municipalities, even though they may be within a school district, might be taxing at slightly different rates also. So it gets pretty complicated, but the nature of this really simple example is just to show that when a business is on a pilot and when it comes off of a pilot, that they will have an impact in the total property wealth and how the total levy then, remember the total levy is these pizza pies back here, how this total property levy gets divided up amongst all the property owners. I know that's really complicated, probably tough to just sit and listen to on an example like this. So please feel free to give me a call or give our business office a call, and we'll try to go through that with you as best we can. Lastly, I want to take a look at reserves. So again, this is part of that third source of revenues. Reserves for school districts, they come in a couple of different ways. They come as restricted reserves and unrestricted reserves. An example of a restricted reserve might be a capital building reserve. When it's a restricted reserve, the school district needs to get permission from the voters in order to set up, for lack of a better word, to set up the reserve itself. So in order to get permission, we have to communicate the purpose. We have to get approval via the annual vote for the reserve itself. We have to articulate what the maximum amount will be. We have to talk about the duration, how long monies can be contributed to those reserves. And we cannot spend a dime out of those reserves if the funds are put in without coming back to the community and also getting approval. So restricted reserves are a mechanism for school districts to help with some of the long-term planning of the districts, be able to smooth some of the ups and downs of revenues. As I've shown, the state can be an unpredictable partner. So having some access to reserves helps us to do long-term planning, especially around capital assets like buildings and vehicles, school buses, for example, technology and equipment, school furniture, a number of items that are larger, expensive items. An unrestricted reserve is a little less regulated, but it still has to be very transparent. The purpose of the reserve has to be clearly stated, and any sort of utilization of that reserve must be communicated via school agendas, and action must be taken in transparent ways. So the Board of Education is authorized to take action to expend the funds or to transfer funds, but they can't just simply do that without making it part of a Board of Education agenda and taking official action via resolution. So in summary, as we look at planning for next year, the total revenues for the district are $25,543,894. If we take a closer look at the real property tax, there would be about $10,881,000 would come from the property tax levy. That's at a rate of 3.39%. Again, that is below the allowable calculation rate of 4.21%. State aid, I mentioned foundation aid remaining flat, so it's the foundation aid that remains flat. The total state aid actually has gone up, but that's because some of those other expense-based aids, such as transportation aid, such as building aid, special education aid, things of that sort, function slightly differently than the foundation aid, which is just one component of New York State aid. You can see here an example of pilots and interest earning. I didn't touch upon that very much, but the pilot agreements and the reserves, those funds come into the budget. The reserves themselves, they can accrue interest while they're in the reserve account. The market has done well over the last year because of the new pilots coming in and some interest developed on the reserves. you can see the total amount of reserves coming in has grown. The appropriated fund balance is going from $300,000 to $470,000. That is because we have to expend some additional funds coming in the coming year to meet the mandate to address our name and imagery. So all of these funds together get us about $521,771 below the amount of money that we need. So in order to close that gap, we plan to make use of some of the unrestricted reserves. We will be utilizing debt service, and we will be utilizing retirement reserves to reach a balanced school budget in total.